Good sign. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod, live after MSU's second round NCAA tournament win against the 10 seed New Mexico Lobos, which they won 71-63. Before we start, a quick thanks to Paul Headland, who made a very generous gift via Venmo. Thanks a lot, Paul. Appreciate it. If you'd like to support the show, and of course, you can head on over to tffinots.com/support to do that. And also, quick shout out to listener David Rayburn, who sent a brief note saying he was there in Cleveland and left a really cool picture of him in his TFFINOTS quarter zip, the same one I have
Hey.
wearing the show. Yeah, so it's pretty cool. So I posted on Instagram if you guys want to see what it looks like. Although if you watch YouTube, you've seen it here. Okay, Rod, let's talk about this game. Things didn't start out well for Michigan State in this game. New Mexico came out hot from three. We're punishing the Spartans in the lane. In contrast, Michigan State struggled from behind the arc despite being wide open. I mean, good rhythm looks too. But they battled back, managed to only be down 2 points at half, 31-29, which this season feels like just right where you want them. Just have a deficit at halftime. That was in part because they held the Lobos to just one field goal in the last 9 minutes of the first half. And then the second half went much as they always do for the Spartans this year. The defense ratchets up a little bit. The opponents have more and more trouble scoring. New Mexico fought hard, battled right down to the end, but just didn't have quite enough. Impressive second half performances from Jaden Akens, Frankie Fidler put the Spartans ahead for the majority of the second half, despite Jace Richardson spending virtually the entire game in the freezer. He was over for a long time until the end, where he scores team's last 6 points, four at the line, and then that amazing offensive rebound putback. Gets a
Yeah.
decisive steal also on the defensive end to seal the game. So now the Spartans move on to the Sweet 16. They're going to face six seed Ole Miss, who defeated Iowa State. And I don't know, where do you want to start here on the recap?
Well, I'll start with Jace Richardson. If if I had told you everybody who plays, which was nine guys, Book didn't play tonight,
Right.
but if everybody who plays for Michigan State is going to score, who's the last guy of the nine to score? I don't think a single soul who watches Michigan State, roots for Michigan State, plays for Michigan State, coaches Michigan State, would have bet on Jace Richardson being that guy, but he was. Jace Richardson, though, true to form, because he's done this kind of thing in other games. It was a game at Breslin, and I can't recall off the top of my head who the opponent was. But in the last, like a winning time, the last like 5 minutes or so, Jace Richardson took that game over without scoring a point. He made several
Oh, yeah,
great
yeah.
assists, great defensive plays. This one at winning time was kind of similar. You mentioned that deflection, just a great defensive play, which really kind of led to that when combined with his drawing a foul on a 3 point shot and hitting all three free throws. That kind of put the nail in the coffin for New Mexico. And then but
Mhm.
then he followed it up. If there was any doubt, he followed it up with that putback of a Frankie Fidler airball for a
Looked
bucket
like
and a foul,
yeah,
and then
a
hit
second
that
on the
free
shot
throw.
clock or something too. Yeah, I
So
mean, he had to put it up right away.
just to step up on a night where that is as tough a night as he's had all year in
Oh,
terms
easily.
of scoring the ball. He just could not get shots to drop. He just wasn't. And frankly, this wasn't one where you'd say, oh, he snake bit. They're going in and out. Like his shots weren't close
No, and he was
for the
wild in the
most
lane, and
part.
those in the past he's hit gone kind of wild, and you're like, whoa, how would he pull that out? And this time
He
he was
also
able to get
made,
anything to him.
though, just a bit before, it was at winning time too, just a bit before the um the defensive deflection and then drawing the foul on the 3 point attempt. He also made a fantastic move where he went down the baseline and found Frankie Fidler in the middle of the lane for a
Yeah,
lay-in when Michigan State was pushing that lead out. So he did it in all phases, rebounds, drawing fouls, hitting free throws, scoring on a putback, basically everything except hitting a three. But drawing the foul and hitting three free throws is just as good. We'll take it. So I just wanted to start with him because I thought he stepped up so big when it mattered most.
well,
Like that
and
was.
what about a guy hitting coming basically, you're 0 for 9 the entire end the game, and you
Mhm.
can't do anything, and then having to hit three free throws in the last 2 minutes of the
Yep.
game. I mean,
Right.
that's impressive.
Right.
I
He absolutely no, that's what I mean. All of it, and that's one facet of it for sure. All of it is a sign of what we've seen all year, which is just an incredibly mature approach and mentality that he has to the game. Younger players, even really good ones, even guys who are heading to the NBA, which, he may or may not be. We don't know.
don't worry about it. It'll happen when it
Right. I'm
happens.
not worried about it
Enjoy this
right
right
now.
now. Just talking. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to everyone else
But
listening.
but even guys like that, you put them in a situation like he was in tonight, and a lot of those guys, even great players, will fold because they're not used to having to fight through adversity. When you're a great player, that's a tough thing. Jace Richardson, let's be honest, and it's his own doing. I don't mean he's been lucky at all, but he's led a charmed life this year. He
Yeah.
hasn't, I'm not saying he hasn't had any adversity, but for the most part, we've talked about it before, and it's something that I've been thinking about for weeks and weeks. Whenever this season is over, I do want to talk about. Obviously, we're going to talk about all the players individually, but specific to him, uh, I want to put him in a context of freshmen that have ever played at Michigan State, and then players, period. And in the latter area, it's obviously not, raw counting stats that he would stack up, but it's the efficiency he's played with, which I struggle to think of anybody who's been better in that way. It's certainly in recent years. Izzo, in the last few days, has started using Cassius as a comparison. But let's keep in mind that's Cassius as a junior and senior, not
Right.
as a
Yeah.
freshman.
Exactly.
And and that's heady company. So I think it shouldn't surprise us. The more shocking thing was that he'd struggled because we just don't see that. But for him to have that kind of night and still find it within himself when the chips were down to make those plays, man, that's a special player and a special person. And I mean, we knew this back in the summertime when
Yeah.
we
When we talked
interviewed.
to him and he came on the show, and
He
head back to our
was
channel to watch that if you want. Yeah.
he, in my opinion, and I think I said, and we've been lucky enough to talk to a lot of Michigan State recruits, sharp people usually.
Hmm. Yeah.
But Jace Richardson is right at the top of that list. I was very, very impressed with him, and as you've seen him be interviewed this whole season, you can't help but be. He's been raised so well, clearly, both as a person and apparently as a student, from what Izzo has said, which doesn't surprise me. I mean, the kid speaks multiple languages. He's
Yeah.
obviously, when you talk to him, you're dealing with, you feel like you're talking to an adult, not an 18-year-old.
Right.
That's the thing that impresses me so much. But that also shows up on the basketball court too. And we've seen it all year. We saw it again when the chips were down tonight, and just hats off to him. So that's why I wanted to start with him. But then I want to go to the other end of the spectrum and talk about the only 4-year guy on this roster, meaning four
Yeah.
years in East Lansing, and that's Jaden Akins. We know that in the Bryant game, Jaden made some plays, but he wasn't very efficient. That was a struggle for him. Not tonight. He had, I want to make sure I get this right. He led Michigan State with 16 points, 8 in the first half, 8 in the second. 7 of 11 overall from the floor, 2 for 4 on threes, and they were big makes because Michigan State didn't get many of those. They only had 4, and he had half of them.
Right.
I was impressed. And his defensive work was phenomenal. All the guards were great. We'll get into that, but you saw a senior who very clearly did not want this to be his last game. I mean,
Yeah.
I really thought Jaden it wasn't even just effort, because he always gives good effort, but it was effort combined with just finding a way to he had some big momentum plays in that first half, especially on a couple of those dunks.
Yeah.
One was a lob dunk from
Hmm.
Jeremy in transition. Those were big plays. I felt like it was not only 16 points, but Jaden's points, which actually has been true this year, even as he struggled at times with his shot. He does have a knack, I think, for making important plays. You can kind of feel sometimes that his baskets are big momentum shifters, even if he's only scoring like 10 points. They tend to be 10 that count. Tonight, I felt his 16 were even a little more outsized than that in terms of his importance. And again, the fact that he was 8 in the first half, 8 in the second half, that's also important, that he was steady.
Yeah,
He
he's
was
so
there
good
the
in
whole
transition, right? I mean, I think that's one, and that's why they're more impactful sometimes too. Where there's that
Yep.
transition three, he doesn't make mistakes in transition. I mean, that I can think he's and he attacks great. You
No,
know,
I mean he may miss a transition three, but
hmm
you're right. No, there's no it's he's
he doesn't make bad decisions.
he's been doing it for 4 years and it shows.
Yep,
But
absolutely.
I really wanted to call him out as or highlight him rather, call him out as negative, and I do not feel
Right. Yeah.
negatively about the way he played at all. I thought he was great. And then I thought we're going to get into it as we go. MSU's transition game was as much as anything else the difference in this one. And
Yes.
hats off once again to Jeremy Fears and Trey Holloman. Trey, 4 assists, 0 turnovers, along with 14 points. Um, Jeremy Fears only had 5 points, and for some reason, he's only got 2 assists to 1 turnover. I felt he was better than that. And I think that he just mustn't have gotten credited for assists on some of the transition stuff because I thought both of those guys were outstanding once again, just as they were against Bryant in terms of pushing pace, which we know is such a huge key to what Michigan State does. And we're at that time of year, isn't it funny, when you're not facing big, and they actually fared better in Big Ten play and transition than we're used to seeing, even when they've
Yeah.
got good transition teams. But boy, it does seem to loosen up a little bit when you're in these games against unfamiliar opponents, right?
hmm
I mean, I think it shows. But the guards, all four of those guys, man, I just named all four. They were huge. Their defensive effort was tremendous tonight, absolutely tremendous. And just hats off to them, man. But then one other guy, and everybody contributed. All night you can name all 9 guys, and they did. Coop had 8 rebounds, so he
hmm
was impressive. Cohen Carr had some big plays as usual, but I want to mention Frankie Fidler, even though he missed those 2 free throws at the end. Um, for Frankie Fidler to come in and score 10 points and again at a point in time where the game was in the balance and Michigan State needed that, they needed buckets, they needed that kind of production. Frankie Fidler stepped up, made some huge plays. I thought he was aggressive. His
hmm
finishing was outstanding tonight. Just the and I don't even know, I guess I didn't look at his other numbers to see what else.
Yeah,
Only
just had
credited
one
one
rebound.
rebound.
He was good defensively, and I think
He
he's been
was
that's 2 games in a row that he's really been just solid. Like he's
had
not
a
doing anything
had a
spectacular, but just
block
staying in
too.
front of his guy. Yep.
Had a
Yep. Had a
big
block.
block. Uh, so I was really happy with him. I mean, that's again, that's another weapon that for certainly for stretches of this year, you felt Michigan State wasn't getting a lot of production out of him.
Right.
And a lot of that was minutes. It was role. His minutes shrunk at a certain point in the season. But, ironically, I really feel like the games we saw in LA where they lost, I thought, and I don't mean that it was a straight hockey stick improvement from there, but I really, I felt he competed, he battled in that UCLA game for sure. And I kind of feel that's where he started to find himself a little bit.
hmm
Since then, I think he hasn't had many double digit games like he had tonight, but he's been making steady contributions. I think the defense that you mentioned has gotten better and better as the year has gone on. It's a shame, and sometimes you say this about transfers. It's kind of a shame that he's not going to get another year here because I really do feel with the progress he's made, and you figure if he had another year, the jumper would have to go better than
For
it
sure.
did.
Yeah.
He could have really, but look, the important thing is right now when they need it, he's stepping up, he's making contributions. He was also a big part of this win.
Yeah. Actually, really surprising for him to be 2 for 5 from the line. And to score 10 points and to really only get 2 at the line, that has not been
Yeah.
his MO when he's
Oh,
had big games. Not that he's had a ton, but it was certainly early in the season. It was almost all at the line. It was
yeah.
actually not from hitting
But you know what
scoring much,
what the
but
deal was tonight is he was playing similarly. He was not settling.
right.
He was going hard to the rim. He was trying to create plays, create contact. But the thing was, he was actually finishing them, which he wasn't always doing this year. And then he wasn't getting calls. They let some stuff go. Both ways.
Yeah.
I thought this was a really physical game. But you could see, and we'll return to this when we talk about the keys to the game. Uh, One team was much, much better than the other in terms of forcing the issue
Yeah.
with contact, getting themselves to the line. That was another thing. That and transition, I think, are the two things that really won this game for Michigan State because that's where the gap was.
Yeah, I mean, I think the traditional, way we look at transition. I mean, obviously, you're scoring the break before the defense sets. The other thing is, are you wearing out the team? And you definitely saw
Yep.
that from New Mexico in the second
No
half
question.
later. But I think the third thing, and this is the positions they're putting players like that one inbounds play right after Junior Joseph had that dunk, and they inbound it right to Jeremy Fears,
Mhm.
and it's no longer by accident when people keep running into from behind. I mean, he's like,
Oh, absolutely
like
not.
to force that fourth foul on Junior Joseph, force him back to the bench with like 7 minutes left or whatever it was.
Yeah.
It was a huge turning point because that guy was they were unable to really slow him down real well. He was probably the most effective player. I know Dent did some damage too, but
Yeah, no,
Joseph was the
no.
guy who was really hard to contain for
We'll
Michigan State
we'll
with the
get
bigs.
back to Dent. They did the
Yeah,
job on Dent, 100%. Uh, Junior Joseph was outstanding,
yeah, he was really
and he
good.
was a problem. But it's a combination of two things, and we talked about it. We talked about this. Hey, it would be this is a foul-prone team, and we
Yes,
know Michigan State tends to play downhill. They put pressure on opponents and force them to foul frequently. And if they could get either of those two main guys in foul trouble, that could be a huge difference maker. Well, they got one of them,
yeah,
and that was what they needed. Some of it, I do think that play was um, a combination of him being a little out of control and Jeremy being smart enough to let it happen.
and inbound like in half a second. I mean, like to
Yep.
not let the dunk
The
bother you and
one
just go ahead and toss it in.
the one before that, where Junior Joseph fouled Jeremy way out on the perimeter when he was trying. We talked about what makes that guy really impactful in my mind and why, as opposed to a lot of big men that you see, I'll go back to last 2 summers actually, and some portions of the Michigan State fan base waxing rhapsodic about this big man or that big man.
Right.
And the vast, vast majority of them really could not play at Michigan State. And I don't care what their counting numbers say they are. They
Yeah.
could not play at Michigan State. Nelly Jr. Joseph could absolutely play at Michigan State. And it's because he's so mobile, he's so athletic
Hmm.
that he can do the things that Michigan State wants their 5 men to do, and clearly what Richard Pitino wants his 5 man to do. So he was out there, and I thought he was effective most of the night in terms of his hedging.
Yeah.
But there were points, and that third foul, which was a huge one, because it came 35 feet from the basket, that was a bad decision.
Yeah.
The one to foul him out, it's Cohen Carr going like a freight train to the rim. That's Michigan State putting him under pressure.
Yeah.
And that's, that's Michigan State's MO. But it was a huge factor. There's no question, because down the stretch, it got to a point, obviously, where they needed more three production than they got to try to stay in it. Michigan State was pushing out to a 3 or even 4 possession game, right?
Yeah. Right.
Margin. But it might not have gotten that far out if Junior Joseph had been in the game and they were able to play through him, because boy, and MSU threw some stuff at him. Obviously they played him straight up sometimes. That didn't tend to go well, but they were really trying to aggressively double down, and They got him a couple times, but for the most part, he survived that.
Yeah.
And so he was the only thing they didn't do is they didn't bring a double. They didn't bring a traditional double from the second big. And I think they worried about his passing ability. I think, and Michigan State rarely does that anyway. So I think they were going to stick with digging down and hopefully try to disrupt him. And they got him a couple times, but for the most part, he did very well with that. So yeah, no question that the foul trouble and eventually fouling him out was huge. But a little bit of that was him getting kind of outside of himself on an occasion or two, but most of it was Michigan State forcing it. And
Yeah.
that's something we talked about. Like that's what they got to do.
He was only
And you
credited for
wonder
one
too, just
turnover.
one more
Yeah.
quick thought. You wonder too on the judgment stuff. I mean, I felt he was still playing hard, but you do wonder, we talk about this all the time, the effects of fatigue are not just strictly physical. They also
Right.
affect the decisions you make.
Yeah.
So might that have been part of his fouling Jeremy 35 feet from the basket or running up his back?
Yeah. I don't think there's any question.
Maybe.
You're a little more tired. You're not making
Yeah.
your decision making is a little bit slower, and you can't react as quickly. I mean, just because you're tired, right? I mean, we all
Right.
feel
And it
that.
does. That's the thing. I think people sometimes think, well, you can obviously see if somebody's suffering the effects of fatigue because, they're dragging, they're not moving. And he was still moving, but I would be very surprised if he did not feel like he'd been in a 15-round fight.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about the player to keep in the gutter, which is Donovan Dent, brought to you by the Brothers Just Gutters. Friends, it is, I say spring, yet I look outside and there was snow tonight. So it's March in Michigan, right? It's probably going to be raining the next couple days. So you want to make sure your gutters are operating properly. The Brothers Just Gutters, they only do gutters. So they specialize in that. So they don't try and sell you anything else. They just do the gutter work. And it's very important, not very sexy, but they get that job done. Whether it's replace, repair, or clean it out, they can do it. If you want to get 10% off as a listener to the show, you can do that. If you go to our support page, click the link there and for either Kurt or Greg, depending which side of the state you live on, and they'll get that 10% to you. If you just mentioned Final Four, again, that's at tffinots.com/support. All right. So Donovan Dent is the guy who Michigan State needed to keep in the gutter. And he was 7 for 18 from the field, no 3-point attempts, no free throws. Guy who averaged, I think, 7 free throws a game, 14
right.
points, 2 rebounds, one of them offensive, 6 assists to 4 turnovers, no blocks, no steals. Again, this is one of those where was he kept in the gutter? Not entirely, but he certainly was not able to do much. And I think in contrast to the Marquette game where he was, he was kind of not playing possum, but certainly was not it was kind of bottled up for the first 30 so minutes of the game and sort of came alive at the end. At the end, this game, he had a couple, but for the most part, he was unable to do much. Got away with that one turnover that they didn't call where he's on the baseline, got that kicked out for a 3. But anyway, the point is, I think they did a good job on him. And, but you can definitely see how he's real slippery, cutting some double teams and stuff like even
Look.
from out of 3-point line. He's good.
Yeah, he's a good player. You're not Mountain West Player of the Year, in a league like that with 4 tournament teams if you're not really good. But Michigan State kept him in the gutter. They did. And you could say, well, he had 14 points. But we talk about this all the time. With the guys who are in this category, you're very, very rarely going to end up with, oh, he scored 2 points.
Right, yeah.
That's not realistic. They're in this category because they're the key guy or one of maybe a couple key guys, right?
Yep.
So that's that. 7 for 18 is an inefficient game. He doesn't take a bunch of threes, but he does average 2 attempts per game and he shoots 41%.
Right.
Didn't get any threes off. He is a very, very effective creator for them offensively. He had 6 assists, so he had some helpers there, but he also had 4 turnovers. You said it should have been 5.
Mm-hmm.
He's among their better, more disruptive defensive players. Didn't have any steals.
Right.
But I absolutely think that game went according to plan. They weren't able to really contain Nelly Jr. Joseph except by virtue of foul trouble. but they were able to contain Dent, and it was exactly as one would have expected. It was a cast of four different guys, all taking turns on him at different points, keeping him out of. I really did not think he lived in the lane. Um,
Got blocked a couple times. He was
yep,
challenged, and so it wasn't easy
yeah,
when he
it
got in there,
it was
without
impressive.
fouling, obviously.
That's the big. That's what I was going to say. That the capper here is zero free throw attempts for a guy who averages 7 a game. That is the single biggest indicator in my mind of what the job Michigan State did. Because if he has a normal game and he's a good free throw shooter, he probably hits 5 or 6 of those. So now you're talking about a 19, 20 point game, not a
Right.
14-point game,
Hmm.
you know? And his shooting efficiency numbers probably would have been better from the floor because some of those misses wouldn't have, if he was fouled on misses, wouldn't have counted as field goal attempts. Hats off to Michigan State defensively, that perimeter group, the job they did with him. They're still going to see some good teams the rest of the way. I mean, whether that's one good teams and good players, I guess, whether that's one game more or 4 more games. I don't know that they're going to face a point guard who's any better than Dent. There may be some guys who are, and then there are players that are different too.
Yeah, sure.
Like Proctor at Duke, if they were to play Duke at some point, he's a totally different kind of player than Dent. We've seen what Michigan calls a point guard. They don't have anybody in Dent's class. Donaldson's a scorer, but he's not a point guard.
Hmm.
Ole Miss we'll get into. I don't believe they have anybody on his level. You
Yeah,
understand what I'm saying.
sure.
That was a real challenge, and they passed the test. And you know what? They have consistently done that with point guards. The rare occasions where we have said somebody we highlighted for this category kind of got loose on them and they didn't keep him, at least, as you say, gutter adjacent, it wasn't point guards.
Right.
When
Wings
they,
or big men. Yeah, yeah.
yep, when they have had a point guard in the crosshairs, and again, it's like this, like Braden Smith, they didn't shut him out, but they made him inefficient,
Right.
you know? So that's what you have to do with high volume, um, ball dominant guys like Dent. You're not going to shut them out, but you make them inefficient. You don't allow them to make their teammates better enough for it to matter. It's exactly what Michigan State did. Could not be happier or more proud of the job they did in that area.
All right. So then who cleans the glass best? Well, the people who clean the glass
Ah,
best are obviously the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. If you need your windows cleaned or even your house power washed, contact the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They'll get on the ladder so you don't have to. They'll do all the stuff, whether it's clean the outside, the interior of the windows, the screens, the windowsills, all that stuff. They even clean your blinds. They'll do all the stuff that you're not going to do, let's be honest, and they'll get things looking really good. The nice thing is, if you're listening to the show, you get 15% off if you get your estimate and just mention Final Four when you get contact Troy and his crew. It is the Swedish Squad of Grand Rapids, so they're not going to cover you in Detroit, but they have a very large region around the Grand Rapids area, the West Michigan area. Give them a call. You'll be glad you did. You can find that, of course, at our support page at the Final Fours, not on the schedule.com/support. And so right now it is, I win again. So
blowout,
17
right?
to 12. Yeah, I had Cooper and Carr, which was 8 and 6 for 14, and you Kohler and Sapawa for 2 and 5s for 7. So 14 to 7. I doubled you up.
Yeah.
Once again, I avoid the humiliation of putting a basketball in my head. So we'll see how much longer I can avoid that. So very impressive rebounding, and it was with Kohler getting 2. This sometimes he's been limited by fouling, and that seems to be the general problem. But this is an interesting game because it got to the point where Sapala played a lot more than he played the first game as far as minutes,
Right.
but it's pretty much a lot of minutes from Carr at playing the 4 pretty much, and you're sort of just shuffling in Kohler more as a 5 than the 4 where he's
Yep.
been playing most of the season. And I think that was for defensive reasons. He wasn't able to quite contain. Was it Azir? Is that his name? I can't remember. Trying to remember his name
Yeah,
now.
but what I think was the deal is they figured out that that kid got off to an incredible first half. He had
Yeah,
12
right,
points. He ended with 14. So
right.
like congratulations, happy birthday. But because he hasn't been that kind of scorer or that kind of efficient shooter all year.
Hmm.
But that happens sometimes. But I think what Michigan State figured out is none of those guys, those 6'9" guys that they would play at the 4 or the 3 even, were real post up threats. They weren't going to use their size as a mismatch, like that was not happening. And so I think what that led Michigan State to do, and Izzo was really unhappy with the defensive job his bigs were doing early on in that game
Right.
for good reason. So I think he found something. He found an energy, and he also found he wasn't being punished for going small. Because you're absolutely right. Cohen Carr, I don't know. I got to look to see
How many
for
minutes he
the
played?
minutes in this
Yeah.
game. He played, well, he played 25, but Frankie Fidler played 18. That's
Yeah.
a big number for him. Coop only had 17. Kohler had 17. Zapala only had 11, but it felt like more than that because
Well, he played
I
just the
actually think
first
he was,
part of the first half, and then I don't think we saw him again until maybe the second half. I think he played more
yeah.
in the
But
second.
I,
I don't
I
know.
actually, I was okay with the job he did. I thought
I was too. Yeah.
I didn't think, it's a funny thing. And look, Coop has had a great year in my opinion, especially defensively. I did not think this was one of his better nights in any respect, other than the rebounding. He did step up, led them in rebounding, right?
Yeah.
So that was important, but they needed and we talked about it. I thought this was going to be a Zapala game. Now you could say, well, 11 minutes, is that truly his game? But it was a lot more minutes than we saw him against Bryant.
Played five
And it,
rebounds in 11 minutes.
yeah, and it was obvious as to why. Like when you've got a post player like New Mexico has, you gotta try to counter that as best you can. And that's exactly what Michigan State did with him, and I thought he held up well. But, overall, I mean, the rebounding was good enough. And I honestly I didn't expect Michigan State to be dominant here because New Mexico as we talked about, is a very good defensive rebounding team. Well, we'll go through this in more detail when we get to the keys, I guess, because it's
Yeah.
it's definitely in there. But I thought MSU did well enough. Wasn't dominant. Certainly wasn't anything. Didn't look anything like the Bryant game, but it was good enough.
Well, that brings us, of course, to the keys, five keys of the game brought to you by Nudge Printing. You can see I'm wearing the Final Fours on the schedule logoed hoodie, and uh, fans now in the stands wearing our stuff. So it's pretty cool. We're going to open the store, I think, this week. I got to talk to Gabe and we'll get things going. I'll get the address to you hopefully by the time we do our next pregame. So you'll have an ability to go order that stuff, whether you get it before the Final Four, when Michigan State's in the Final Four. I don't know. Well, hopefully we get there.
Wait, by the
Um,
time it's open, we may have to have a national championship version.
we might. You might
We'll
have to have
see.
like a cross out the knot. I will see. Anyway,
We'll see.
that'd be great. So anyway, head over to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. Fantastic selection of Spartan apparel, all kinds of other schools as well. Whether you want to get vintage logos or just sort of modern day logos, they've got all the stuff there, all the different sort of basketball ones, dunking Sparty, the ones that a lot of the coaching staff wears. You can find that over at Nudge. They are licensed for Michigan State. They're one of the few licensed companies that can do that stuff. They all do everything in Portland, Michigan. So again, great, fantastic stuff that you're supporting great Spartans that are here in the state of Michigan. So we begin with five keys of the game. Oh, and Final Four, just as one word at checkout to get 20% off, as most people probably know by now. So the transition game is first. Michigan State, as you mentioned, really did a great job here, and 17-3 edge in fast break points. We talked initially about not only was it a fast break for Michigan State to avoid the New Mexico set defense, but it was also that we had to prevent New Mexico from getting transition because that's how they score a lot of their points too. Because in general, they're a little clunky in the half court, which today they didn't look that bad, especially with Junior Joseph down low. But you saw that in the second half, they really kind of struggled to get stuff going in the half court. So keeping them out of the lane and out of transition was just as important.
Yep. Yeah. Look, as I said earlier tonight, I think that there were a couple of things that really separated these teams, and this was one of them. And we had said that. I really did feel, despite the fact that New Mexico was third in fast break points in the country, just tiny, tiny edge over Michigan State, who's fourth nationally now. I felt like this was a game that there were going to be opportunities for MSU to maybe carve out an edge here if they were solid with the ball. And again, New Mexico's a team that over the course of the year has managed to force a lot of live ball turnovers. They force a lot of turnovers in general,
Mm-hmm.
and their live ball variety where they're getting steals specifically. They only had 5 steals in this game.
Right. Less than Michigan State.
Right. What did Michigan State end up with? Michigan
6.
State ended up with 6.
Yeah.
That's a big. If you had told me that before the game, I would have expected, well, MSU is going to have an advantage. I wouldn't have known it would be quite this large, but I would have thought that because it was very, very likely that Michigan State was going to control its defensive boards. And I thought there was a chance so that would give them opportunities to get on the break. And we saw it. We were talking about that foul, right?
Yeah.
Not even defensive boards, but just pushing the ball. You knew Michigan State was probably going to be able to do that. It's funny, a team that has this mentality that New Mexico has to run the ball. Sometimes those are teams that don't necessarily respond to getting it done against them. I think we talked about that in the pregame. The genius of Tom Izzo is that his teams never get suckered into that. Even his best transition teams are generally pretty damn good in limiting opponents' fast breaks. That's exactly what we saw in this game.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it all added up. Michigan State did a good enough job. They didn't dominate, but they did a good enough job on the offensive glass against a very good defensive rebounding opponent to limit New Mexico's ability to get clean rebounds. So that stopped them from getting in transition. And then they weren't giving up live ball turnovers. They had one. I mean, New Mexico ended up with 3 fast break points. I vividly remember 2 of them because they came on a turnover, one of the few, if I remember correctly, where they ended up getting a lob for a dunk on a 2-on-1. And that was it.
Yeah.
So huge, huge factor in this game. I love the way Michigan State pushed. And you know what? That's going to be standard operating procedure the rest of the way. I think it's going to be tougher in the next one than it was tonight because I have more faith in Chris Beard as a defensive coach. But we got time enough to talk about that later. Right now, we'll celebrate the fact that for tonight, Michigan State, once again, just absolutely shoved it down an opponent's throat in transition. Huge part of the win.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the fast break points from statistically speaking through the season for New Mexico is, large part related to your competition. And so Michigan State was pulling that off against Big Ten competition and
absolutely
versus Mountain West. Nothing against Mountain West. It's just not as good. And it's probably some of the coaching is a little bit looser than it is in the Big Ten. And I think you saw that tonight.
And it's also, I go back to this idea that even if you're a team that likes to run, that doesn't necessarily mean you're effective in stopping others from doing it against you. Sure. I would guess that most teams in the Mountain West, because of how effective New Mexico has been in that phase of the game, they likely don't look to try to get into a running game with them. So I would doubt that they have many opponents trying to run with them. They probably don't see this very much.
Yeah.
And it is a shocking thing. We talk about this all the time. When you don't see it regularly, and I'm sure Richard Pitino did everything he could to get that message across, but man, there's talking about it and then there's dealing with it.
Yeah. I tell you, no matter how many times I tell my kids about stuff, that doesn't mean they listen to me. Right. Believe you until they actually experience things.
That's the other thing that's important to remember.
Yeah.
We are still talking about young adults. I mean, you're a physician, you probably know this. Isn't it generally understood that human beings, particularly young males, don't fully reach what we would deem to be adulthood until they're in their mid-20s, typically?
Yeah, I think your brain keeps developing to 25. But I would say, I think this is a life thing that is somewhat related to kids, teenagers certainly, but even older adults. Like you tell them things until you experience it, right? Like you always want to learn from someone else's mistakes and not make them yourself. Right. But sometimes just that's not the way it works, and you just have to do something dumb, and then you're like, okay, I won't do that again. So we're all like that.
Unfortunately, most people, I would agree with that, need to learn from experience, and that's the case here. That I think you have to see it
Yeah, right.
before you can really deal with it.
So then moving on to the boards, this is one where Michigan State had certainly had an edge. It was, I think, overall and I am trying to like keep track of YouTube and all this stuff, but so they had a little bit of an edge in the rebounds by a couple rebounds, I think. But from the offensive standpoint, they had 9 offensive boards, which was a 30% rebounding rate, which is
Well,
like,
no,
meh.
they actually had 2 teams, so they were 11.
Oh, they had 11. Oh, so they were
Yep.
probably plus 30 some percent. I'm trying to get, and
11,
then
11 rebounds out of 30 missed shots.
11 out of 30. So
So
that's
mid 30s,
33% or
mid
something like that.
30s. Yeah,
Yeah. And then I had New Mexico was 6, but
that's
I don't,
correct.
yeah. And so
6 out
that's a
of
20 point,
29.
that's like a little over 20%. So Michigan State did the job on the defensive board. So they've been doing most of the season against a team that's not great offensive rebounding, but they're not, they're not totally like schlups. So they did the job there. And second chance points, not really an edge, is actually an edge to New Mexico, 9-8. Because I think one of those, Michigan State had like 4 of, or like 3 offensive rebounds just finally get it in from like
Yep.
6 inches away. But anyway, they did it. They did a job there. They got a couple extra
They
field goal
kind of
attempts.
came in clusters at times.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was good enough, on a 11-6 doesn't look like a mass. It matters. I mean, it's significant enough. But when you really break that out on a percentage basis, on a rebounding rate basis, it's, they had a mid-teens edge. That's substantial. Why does that matter? Well, it's not surprising to me that Michigan State limited them to around, just over 20% on New Mexico's offensive end, because that's what Michigan State does. And this is a mediocre at best offensive rebounding team. Other than Junior Joseph, who I didn't look what he had in this game. Oh, he only had 1 offensive rebound.
Yeah, he didn't have, he
So,
just had the one. Yeah.
um, but that's what Michigan State does. The question mark coming into this game was, what does a very, very good offensive rebounding team do against a very good defensive rebounding team? And
Right.
for Michigan State to end up in the mid 30s in rebounding rate, that's a win. We always talk about 30% is I think the national average is actually 29.8% to be precise, but let's just call it 30 is your break even point.
Mm-hmm.
If you hit 30, you've done a middling job. If you're anything above that, you've been some form of good. And Michigan State was really good considering the opponent. That's the other thing. You got to grade
Sure.
on a curve, right?
Right. Yep.
These guys are, I believe, top 30 in defensive rebounding rate. Michigan State
There's,
still did kind of their thing. That's big. It didn't result in, I don't even think it resulted in an edge in second chance points. I think they lost that, 9-8. But that was small comfort to New Mexico
yeah.
because it was just on some of those occasions, just especially some of that stuff late, Michigan State was timely with it. And it just, we talk about this, sometimes offensive rebounding just drains your opponent. It's such
Yeah.
a momentum play.
Demoralizing for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So the third key to the game is the free throw line. And this was a little rough for Michigan State. So it was good in the sense that Michigan State got there a lot. I mean, the 19 for 28. So 28 free throws. They missed 2, I think, front ends of 1-and-1s as well. So just a sort of putrid 67%, which I guess is better than New Mexico was 5 of 10. They're 50%. Now, they're not a good free throw shooting team, so they were well below their average of like 69%. So huge win for Michigan State there. Obviously, they made 9 more than New Mexico even attempted. So that was, clearly that's the difference in the game as well as far as the margin of victory.
Yeah, I think even with the shoddy, which, look, as you move up the ladder and you go deeper into this thing, you start to get to a point where you can't afford 19 for 28.
Right.
So we all acknowledge that. But the attempts and the makes still was huge. Plus 14 in made free throws, that's a big advantage.
Yeah.
Really big. And they earned it. We talked about the Dent kid averages 7 free throw attempts a game himself. He didn't get any. That's fantastic. Michigan State did their thing. I will say they were 2 Frankie Fidler makes from being 75% in this game. That's what they should have been.
Yeah. I mean,
weren't.
he's never gone 2 for 5 this
Right.
season. That's crazy.
Right.
40%.
So, I mean, this is a guy who was over 90% most of the year.
Yeah.
So Disappointing for sure. I'm sure it's something we haven't seen any of Izzo's post-game press conference, but I'll guarantee he mentions that because he should.
Yeah.
But I think that it's still very much a good enough job here. The biggest thing to me was New Mexico is a little shaky in terms of how much they have to foul. We know what Michigan State typically does in putting opponents under pressure. Can they do that against a team that's foul prone? And the answer was absolutely yes.
Yeah. Fourth key to the game is turnovers. Both teams had 9 turnovers. And as we mentioned before, not any huge live ball problems from Michigan State's standpoint. New Mexico definitely had some. I mean, the transition game was in part from sort of the turnovers for touchdowns, but also off defensive rebounds or even off, or I think they even had one off a made field goal, which is not too unusual for Michigan State. So anyway, turnovers are not an issue. They're not some, it looked shaky. And again, I mentioned this in the pregame. It would be nice for Michigan State not to lead off the game with 1 or 2 turnovers in the first few possessions, but they seem to have this in the last few games. It's really kind
Yeah.
of, it's tough to get rolling. I mean, they come back and they're able to overcome these deficits, but at some point you're not going to be able to, or it's going to be a lot harder. So
Yeah,
it would be
this
nice for them to
is
start out clean.
and it hasn't been. I mean, they've had a lot of comebacks this year from halftime deficits, but I don't feel like it's been a chronic thing with bad starts. But, both of these games in the tournament thus far, they were not great starts. I mean,
Yeah.
that's for sure. Um, so I uh I, I think that the most important thing, um sorry, I lost my train of thought. I'm watching
The
Oregon
end of
try
the
to
Oregon
pull off
game,
a miracle. What was our key again here?
the
Sorry, folks.
turnovers.
Yeah, they actually MSU had a one turnover advantage. They had a team turnover credited to them, so it was 10-9,
Oh, okay.
not 9-9. But that was huge because again, we talked about this. New Mexico's pretty good in this area, and as we know, Michigan State, it's not horrible problems typically, but just enough at times that you worry about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and so, well, that's that. So Big Ten will be 4 teams in the Sweet 16, not five.
Yeah.
But um, I think the other thing too was points off turnovers. Uh, Oregon, Jesus. New Mexico only had 8. Michigan State had 14. So a 6-point edge there versus a 1-point deficit and second chance points. You're winning that battle too.
Yeah.
Not hugely, but enough. I just think this is one that you look at and say, if you play them even, that's a win. And Michigan State actually did better than that if you're factoring in the points they generated off the mistakes. And they had one fewer in a raw sense, and they had one more live ball turnover.
Yep. All right. So the fifth and final key to the game we've already talked quite a bit about was Dent. They
Yeah.
did a good job of containing him and preventing him from being, a difference maker in this game. And I don't know if there's much more to say about it. We've kind of covered everything with him, and that once again, Michigan State takes care of the most important player on a team and makes it hard for them to find it. You just have to find a new combination to win a game against Michigan State, and that's tough. Some
Well,
teams they don't have as many options.
here's the thing. I think this weekend really illustrated what makes Michigan State so good defensively in the backcourt. Their first game, New Mexico's first game, Dent was covered by a guy named Stevie Mitchell from Marquette, who is an outside. I don't know. I think he might have been Big East Defensive Player of the Year. If he wasn't, he was. I'm sure he was on their All League defensive team. He gets a lot of notice as a great individual defender, and
Mm-hmm.
he did a great job limiting Dent until the last whatever it was, 6-7 minutes. Dent, you look up, Dent ends up with 21 points and 8 assists. It was inefficient in some ways because he also had 6 turnovers. But when it mattered, when the game was there in the balance to be won or lost, Dent was able to show up. The difference is Michigan State runs 4 guys at you
Right.
always at least three, but it's with the switching they do, it's going to be all four are going to take their turns on you. And that is a very different kind of equation than just saying, well, we've got this one stopper.
Right. Because he's got to
No.
sit at some point, usually.
He's got to sit, but it's also the effect Marquette, not a deep team.
Right.
So you have to, in a tight ball game, which that one was, high tension, very physical. You wonder, and I don't know him or Marquette quite well enough to be able to say it definitively, but you do wonder, hey, did he just get a little bit tired? And Dent was able to overcome that and stay fresh enough to go out and make winning plays when it mattered. Maybe. So I think the equation for Michigan State, even though they only had one guy on the all defense team, right? Which is a joke. I mean, you could have, if you wanted to, um, three
Sure. Yeah.
in my mind. I think Jeremy Fears, Jaden Akins, and Carson Cooper should have been all defense team. They only one of them was, only Jaden, but it doesn't matter because the reality is in a game, you got to deal with Jaden and Jeremy and Trey and even Jace.
Hmm.
And that is a hard thing to overcome when you're playing 40 minutes. And Dent played, what did he play? It was like 30, it was a
I
high number of
I don't feel
minutes.
like he ever left the game, but maybe he did.
He
I don't
did
know.
briefly.
Yeah.
38 minutes. So
Yeah.
he
So
had,
basically not. Yeah.
man, I'm sorry. I don't think there's a point guard in the country, and I don't think I'm going to be proven wrong in saying this. I don't think there's a point guard in the country that can go 38 minutes against that group and have an efficient game. Their team might do enough around them to get it done. It doesn't guarantee Michigan State a win. I'm just saying if you are a team with a high level point guard and that guy is the fulcrum of everything you do, good luck if you don't have enough depth that you can get that guy some rest. Because when you get down the stretch, there's just no way he's going to have the same amount of energy in the tank as he would in a normal game because of the pressure Michigan State puts on you and the number of bodies they roll out there. It's
Yeah.
just a fact. And I think that that's the thing. What the conclusion I draw from this is it's far easier said than done, but you are better off in every respect with having this kind of depth as opposed to, well, we've got one guy that we say is just a great individual lockdown
Sure.
defender. I'm not convinced Stevie Mitchell is actually any better than Jaden Akins or Jeremy Fears as an individual defender. But let's say he's slightly better. Doesn't matter because
Yeah.
he's one guy. They got four.
Yeah.
Just
Well, and I think, the other part about it too, and I think Jim Comparoni was talking about it, Magboard or somewhere about the fact that not only do you're putting Dent under this intense defensive pressure while he's on offense, but there's no place to hide him against the Michigan State
yep,
offense against their guards. Now, like
absolutely.
you can be a wing and kind of hide because you're like, well, I'm guarding, say Fidler or Carr. I know Carr's not, he has a drive, but he's not going to be a shooter.
Right.
So
Right.
I'm not put under the same defensive pressure as I am if I'm guarding. I mean, which guard do you take in this Michigan State team and say, well, I'll just guard this guy. I mean, you're gonna be running all over the place no matter who it is, and then of course you're running up and down the court because it's gonna be a fast transition. So
Transition.
it is
Absolutely.
it is. I can only imagine how hard it is and exhausting it is by the end of the game. And I mean, we saw that with this. He was missing shots that I think he probably normally makes at the end of the game, the kind of short 8-10 footers, and I think that was probably at least somewhat contributed from just the intense game pressure and just
Yeah.
all that. So. A couple other things before we go here, just a couple words from some comments here. So one of the comments from Tim, well, actually, this guy's, who is it? Yeah. So Tim Campbell said, can we start Carr on Friday to avoid him missing the first 8 minutes of the game? And I'll start just by answering. I think the thing you don't know about this game, well, I think one of the things that Michigan State has to be concerned with is if you throw Kohler in at the 5, sometimes he's not maybe best suited for the 5. I mean, you could
Correct.
not have him there. And from a rebounding perspective, you pretty much need him. Now you can put Cooper out there, but again, Cooper, as you've mentioned many times, he can't play 40 minutes. he's playing 20 or so or whatever. And so, although Carr is certainly a good option, and maybe you could say, well, maybe bring him in a little earlier than, I don't know if it was really 8 minutes, but it's probably 6 minutes or something in the game.
No,
Maybe bring
it
him in a little.
was because
Yeah.
their rotation, they they weren't getting the automatic stoppages as quickly as they normally
Right.
would. So I think it was actually, I did notice that. Might
Yeah.
not have been quite 8, but it was definitely well past the say 15, 16 minute mark you would normally see him.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think that's, you have to sit
They're not
somebody,
going to
and
change. They're
they're
not
not going to change
changing
it
the
now,
starting
obviously, because it's
lineup.
working.
No,
And again, I do think, and we talked about the pregame. I do think there's an advantage to having Sapala out there because you don't know. Like, I don't think they knew exactly how he'd be on Junior Joseph, and I thought he did. He's okay. Like we mentioned, he played 11 minutes, but I think that gives you a feel for the game. Their problem was not Zapala, is the fact that they were just kind of playing dumb and getting us turnovers early, and just
not
I
hitting
think
shots.
not hitting shots that were open, that were ones they normally hit. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I can see the point, I can see the argument, but I just don't think. I think the counter
Here,
argument is probably just
here's
as strong, and it's
here's the
working.
thing. Cohen Carr played 25 minutes.
Right? Yeah.
Okay. That's, if you're saying you want him up closer to 30, uh, I guess I could envision a scenario like that. Okay, here we go. So Michigan State, sorry, this is happening live. Michigan State will be playing on Friday.
Yep. Okay.
That's interesting because that was not a guarantee. Like Maryland is playing on Thursday.
Oh, I thought they probably had those tickets
Arizona,
sold already
Arizona
for.
and Duke are playing on Thursday. So yeah, it was not a guarantee. So we'll have
Okay.
just in a second, I would
Friday,
imagine
Sunday,
they're
we'll
going
get
to
the time.
shift. It's going to be Friday night at some point. Hopefully, oh, 7:09 tip. They're the first game on Friday. Thank
Okay.
God on CBS. Well, I just after these two,
Yeah. 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 Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we'll have that first, and assuming Michigan State takes care of business, you get to see Michigan play Auburn at 9:39 to determine who they'd face if they're fortunate enough to get to the regional final.
All right.
Um, anyway, you said there were some other comments. Sorry
Oh
to
yeah. So,
derail
so
that, but the
JT
the
JT
beauty
commented.
beauty of going live.
Right. JT, the channel should be more popular. It's crazy. It's less than 1,000 subscribers. Well, thanks, JT. I'm glad you're subscribing. And this channel is relatively new in the sense that we actually have actual live
Right.
video. So I think we've had over 100% growth in just like 2 months. So
And
it's
if you're curious, you should know that this is YouTube is still not where we get by far the bulk of our listenership from.
no, it's definitely
It's becoming more important, but yeah, this is until the last what, 2 months?
2 months really. I mean, yeah, I
This
think
has
we
been a just we're not going to, we don't need to go into all the
audio.
details, but you reference it frequently enough that, this show was in the top 50 basketball subject matter podcasts frequently
Yeah.
anywhere in the world. So we get a lot of podcast listeners. I would say the fact that we're doing these live on YouTube now is, an added bonus if you're up past the game and you still feel like talking about or listening to other people talk about it. Uh, that's a nice feature, and we certainly are very grateful for the growth in the YouTube channel. But yeah, you should understand that. I feel like we're I'm happy with our popularity and it continues to grow. So we'll put it like that.
Yes, absolutely. And from Paul Siak, I think. So great pod for the ride home. So you're welcome for listening to us live. Have a safe trip home from Cleveland, wherever you're heading back in, I assume Michigan, but I guess you could be anywhere. I will say that I'm glad I'm not coming back from Cleveland because I can only imagine what time I'd be coming back.
Yeah,
It'd
yeah,
be
you
insanely,
especially on the
yeah,
west side. Yeah.
it'd be
It's
like
it's a
4 hour
good it's a
drive.
it's a nice, 3-ish hours from here
Yeah.
from Detroit. So yeah, you'd be tacking on another 2.5 or 3 to that. Um,
So I
yeah, and
guess,
I guess
yeah.
that brings up I may have mentioned it at the outset, I don't know, but what we're going into, the one downside of Ole Miss winning, and still on balance, I wanted Ole Miss to win. Even down a man, I felt like Iowa State's, here's a word I hate using, Iowa State's ceiling is higher because
Yeah.
Iowa State has some really skilled players. They're also a good defensive team. I mean, but the thing is, they had injury problems, and as a result of it, they'd kind of, it wasn't a total hit the skids routine, but they were a team that, say, the beginning of February or late January was viewed pretty much unanimously as a legit Final Four contender.
Yeah, right.
And they came into this thing, even though they were seeded third, I don't think anybody realistically viewed them as likely to do that. But having said all that, I still, I worried about that team because of the kind of talent, the shot makers they've got. They got a kid that I think they were high school teammates. They were definitely AAU teammates. They got a kid named Curtis Jones who Trey Holloman knows very well. And MSU actually played him Trey's freshman year. Curtis Jones was playing for Buffalo at that time. And he transferred to Iowa State. He was the top sixth man scorer nationally this year. He's a hell of a player. They got other guys. They've got a kid, Mosilovich, who's a guy from Wisconsin that Michigan State recruited pretty heavily. And he ended up going to Iowa State. That guy is a problem. 6'9", perimeter shot maker, good handle. Iowa State's got guys. That's not to say Ole Miss doesn't. They do.
Yeah.
But all that said, the one big negative about Ole Miss is that these games are going to be played in Atlanta. So Michigan State's going to be dealing with, presumably, I think Michigan State will, they always do. They'll have a good turnout, but you would expect Ole Miss will have, you know,
More
they'll
people.
have the dominant presence in terms of fan turnout because of where that game is being played.
Sure.
And so that's not ideal, but then again, I've seen Michigan State come through those scenarios countless times. So that doesn't really worry me that much.
Yeah, I can say I was at the 2019 regional final against Duke, and that was 80% Duke fans, and that was in DC.
Right.
So, you know,
Exactly.
whatever.
It's happened many times.
Yeah.
The '09 region, I forget where that was.
Don't
Was that
ask
in
me. I have no
Indianapolis?
idea.
It was
Could
they
be.
played Louisville, and even though Michigan State had a good turnout, Louisville was insane.
Yeah.
And it was wherever it was. I think it might have been Indy. I'd have to go back and double check that, but the turnout was obviously heavy Louisville. Didn't matter.
Yeah.
So I'm not in NCAA. I mean, NCAA tournament games. The reality is that when you're in these domes or these big arenas, it's a more diffuse effect. I'm not saying it doesn't matter at all, but it's a more diffuse effect than, say, if they were going to Oxford to play Ole Miss in their gym down
Sure.
there.
Yeah.
It's not
Right.
the same thing.
Right.
Just like I would say for Michigan State, if they were playing these games at Little Caesars, it would be great, but it wouldn't be like Breslin.
Yeah. So final
So
things, Sean Southers, asked about the quarter zip. We are, it is not for sale at this point. That's why we're trying to set that up with Gabe. And so hopefully it'll be later this week. And so listen to the pregame, and hopefully we'll have an address for you to find it if you want to get a Tiff Nuts stuff.
one other point I
Okay.
wanted to make before we wrap it up. I've mentioned this a few times. I don't always mention it, but once again, Michigan State won the race to 69, and I
Right.
believe I think that makes them 27-0 when they do that. I didn't think they were going to get to 69. They ended up with 71 for a long time, even as late as 7-8 minutes left in this game. I just didn't think they were going to get there, and they did. In fact, the bucket that put them over the top was Jace Richardson's offensive rebound. That
Right.
got him from 68 to 70. And his free throw after that was the last point they scored. But pretty remarkable. And it's not an accident because I think, generally speaking, this team is one, as we know, that benefits from playing fast,
Mm-hmm.
And if they're able to do that, that's going to bode well. And to get to 69, you probably got to be playing at least at a reasonable pace. Doesn't mean that you're in transition 90% of the time, but you're playing at a reasonable pace to get to 69 points. The games that they haven't done that, they didn't do it either. The games we saw in Southern California, well, those were games that were not fast. That USC threw kind of a junk defense at them that
Right.
really caused, and UCLA is just at their best, they're a very good defensive team, and they were somewhere near their best that day and that night, in my opinion. But that also, turned into a slower paced physical game. It's just that's the thing. I mean, and it's not to say that nobody can beat MSU if that opponent also plays fast, but it's harder.
Yeah.
And the race to 69 is it's not a serious thing that, oh, they hit 69, that's it, they can't be beat. But it is an indicator, and it's an indicator for what are actually some valid reasons in terms of what it's telling you about the way a particular game is being played and
Yeah.
how that cuts to MSU's benefit.
I just want to add one other thing to it, just thinking about it. And I actually commented to my family and talked about it, but the end of the game, how far Cohen Carr has come that he's on the floor at the end of the game when Michigan State has a lead
Yep.
and the other team is trying to foul you, that you feel that you want his defense, you want his rebounding, you want his athleticism, and that you're not worried about him being fouled out there. I mean, that
Not at
is
all.
what a
Not at
testament to
all.
him. I know they put the stat, he was 68% or so for the year, but we
Yeah.
both know that he's shooting well over 70% over the last whatever stretches recently. He was just so bad at the beginning
Oh,
of the
I
season.
think for the bulk of the I'd love to see, I'm sure I could pull it
Some
up,
sort of split or something. Yeah,
his Big Ten free throw shooting percentage. I'm going to guess,
it's got to be 75 probably.
I was going to say mid to high 70s
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
because he doesn't
Anyway,
shoot a ton of them.
pretty cool and
But,
testament to his work that he's put in at the
oh,
end of the year.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's also, by the way, and nothing guarantees anything, but it's also a good indicator, as well as the fact that we've seen him hit some during the course of this year, that there's a good chance the jump shot's going to come.
Right.
Maybe next year. I
Exactly.
mean, I don't think when you can improve your free throw shooting that way, and his stroke looks good, like it's not a fluke.
Yeah.
That's gonna be, yeah, that's gonna make him almost illegal, to use an Izzo statement, if he
He'll
if he
he'll
can
left the
add
human
that
race at that point for sure.
if he
Uh,
can add that to the rest of his game. But yeah, I'm with you. Like right now, the way things are, there aren't too many guys I feel more confident in
yeah.
than him, because the guys that were in the upper 80s all years have been struggling lately.
Hmm.
So at least in terms of a momentum play, you're like, yeah, give me 55 on the line.
Yeah. And so
Um,
then, oh, go ahead. Do you have anything else? I was going to just
well,
go to the
I
last
was just going to
comment.
add one more comment I alluded to a few minutes ago when I was watching the end of the Oregon Arizona game. So the Big Ten ends round two with half of its teams getting into the Sweet 16. It's Michigan State, Maryland, which won. I didn't get a
Buzzer
chance to
beater.
see it
The other
live
Mountain West
because
team.
it didn't get a chance to see it live because it was going on during the beginning stages of Michigan State. But I've seen the replay. Colorado State hits a three with about 11 or 12 seconds left to go up a point, and no, it was actually with like 4 seconds.
6 seconds. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was not much time. Yeah.
and Derek Queen hit an amazing fadeaway on the baseline bank shot
Over
to
Ethan
win it.
Morton.
Yeah, to win it. That puts Maryland through. And then obviously yesterday we saw Purdue cruise and Michigan pull the horseshoe out of its ass again and get through. But I would say this. I think there's a pretty good argument that that's on balance. That's four of your five best teams that made it through. Wisconsin would be the one team that you would put in there. And they didn't play great yesterday, but still pushed BYU to the limit. Had a chance in a game where they were frankly outplayed.
Yeah.
But other than that, I would say, four of your five best, I think, and pretty much a consensus view, got through. And in a one and done format, you people love to debate this stuff, but I do think it says something about the quality of your league, at least in a very general way, that you're able to do that. That makes the league what, 12-4, I think.
Probably. Yep. Right.
Yeah, because they were
Yeah,
eight
because they're
zero in
8
the
0.
first round,
Hmm.
4-4 in the second round. So 12-4, pretty good. I mean, there's
Guaranteed a winning record.
guaranteed a winning record, and it's going to continue to get tougher because if you look at it, let me think about this. Only one of the four will be favored would be
Just
my
Michigan
guess.
State, right? Yeah.
Yeah, just Michigan State, because Maryland has got to face.
They Florida? I can't remember now.
Yes,
My
Florida.
broken are so busted.
Maryland faces Florida. I think Maryland's got a shot. Florida's a good team, but Florida was on the ropes against UConn today.
Hmm.
Um, Maryland's got a shot.
They're just not very deep.
Michigan against Auburn. I'm going to be very surprised if Michigan can pull that
But
out.
you've
But
predicted
they've
two
been.
losses so far for
I've
Michigan. They've
been.
pulled it.
I had them going out to San Diego, and I really thought A&M was going to get them yesterday. So, admittedly, I've been proven wrong. Auburn's a different level though.
Yeah.
Um, and then Purdue. Purdue's
Houston
got to
in
play a once.
Indianapolis.
Houston. Yeah, the Indianapolis thing is interesting, but again, I think that's how much good did it do Purdue in the Big Ten tournament, right? So
Yeah, there just aren't as many. I tell you from the Big Ten tournament, there are way, 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 way more Indiana
it's
fans
not IU.
than
Yes.
they're Purdue fans.
Well,
So
it's a smaller school. It's not
bunch of
it's
engineers, right?
it's
Yeah.
and really the biggest point is I don't think Purdue has anywhere close to, what people used to reference with regard to Notre Dame, the Subway alumni or
Right.
Walmart Wolverine fan base. That is all Indiana
Yeah.
in that state.
So the
So
last, and just speaking, because we're on the subject, the last comment from Sean Southers, at first was about the apparel. The second one was speaking of ceiling, because he was referencing when you're talking about the ceiling.
Yeah.
Poor Illinois had their head hit on it today. So goodbye, Brett Underwood, and we'll see if he ends up staying at Illinois. There's always rumors of him heading elsewhere.
I suspect he's not moving because the job that was kind of mooted for him was
Right.
Texas, and they're hiring Sean Miller. So I would be very surprised. Frankly, unless and I don't get the sense that he's got a problem with the AD. He certainly doesn't have a problem with resources because Illinois spends. Everybody will tell you that.
It just sounds like he does not like the cold, is what I've heard.
Really? Okay,
Yeah,
that's interesting.
which they got
He's-
plenty of in Champaign, let me tell you.
He's from Kansas. What the?
Well, but he's, I mean, there are plenty of people. My dad's like, I want to go where it's warm. I want to get out of the winter. So I don't know.
I
Guy's
guess.
getting old.
Well, maybe you're right. I mean, but I don't know. I don't know where that job like Texas. I guess I could have seen, but that seems to be off the table. So I don't know where he's going. You got to be really careful with that stuff, man, because
Sure.
even though he hasn't had he did have that run to the Elite Eight last year. He hasn't had, the Final Four run. But he's got a pretty good deal at Illinois.
Well, all I can say is if he ends up in Florida, it is miserable and terrible. And I would, I would never want to live there myself.
One other thought about that too, I guess we should talk about briefly since we're on the subject. So it appears that at least the openings that exist currently are all filled. Has Iowa closed a deal with McCollum?
I don't believe I've seen a closing, but Wikipedia has him as the new head coach for Iowa.
That would be
it'd be. I think at this point, it'd be very surprising. There's always an outside chance. I think that he ended up at West Virginia because he has a relationship with the AD.
Yep.
So it's not been announced. The portal opens tomorrow for players transferring. So I know the Iowa fans are freaking out. They want it done, obviously.
But they're not going to be. Look, the most important portal guy they'd get would be his point guard from Drake,
right?
Which would be
absolutely.
very important.
Yeah, and they've got a couple good pieces too. Yeah,
I guess the deal would be, is he able to retain Josh Dix and the younger Sanford,
Price Sanford? Yeah,
and that might be the case. But I was just going to say in a general sense, other than that, kind of keeping Iowa guys in the fold. He's not going to go out, and it's not like he's going out and is going to have an IU style budget. That's not going to be his MO. The reason that's a good hire is this is a guy who's done nothing but win, mostly because he's able to identify and develop talent. I mean, how many guys did he bring with him from D2 to Drake? 4?
Yeah, 4.
Look at where Drake was. They won a first round game and they were competitive in a second round game with 4 D2 guys.
Yeah.
Right. And one of them is probably going to be the point guard at Iowa next year, assuming he does take the job. That's exactly the kind of coach Iowa should hire. No guarantees that they win big with him, but I think he is exactly the profile of what Iowa should be hiring, because the fact is, Iowa's got, and you know this, we've talked about it here, I think, Iowa's got a number of competing priorities. Most Big Ten schools, football is the king, of course, everywhere, but then men's basketball is number two. And at Iowa, you got to throw wrestling and women's basketball in there somewhere, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's
So
wrestling is number two, arguably number one, but it's a much smaller sport, and the sense from a spending standpoint compared to football.
crazy.
And then women's basketball is fourth. And
But
that's been
but
distantly
enough of a
fourth until
fourth,
recently. Yeah,
but
but it is a fourth.
enough of a fourth that it matters, right? Because
It does now. Yeah, right,
it's going to mean you at number three in men's basketball is not as strong a number three as you might otherwise be.
right.
And that's the problem. So it's hard to see a scenario short of some mystery mega donor who's going to just foot the bill themselves, which does not seem to be the case. It's hard to imagine that Iowa will get into the upper half of the Big Ten in terms of spend. I just don't see that.
Yeah.
So if that's the case and you're honest about that, then what you ought to do is you ought to go find a guy who's proven he can get it done with guys that don't cost that much. And that's what I think they've got.
Yeah.
He's going to make them a pain in the ass, would be my guess. Now, I've been wrong sometimes before with coaching stuff, but I've also been right. And I think Ben McCollum, again, I don't think that means Iowa's going to go on a string of winning 10 straight Big Ten titles. But I think that's the right guy with the right profile to max out what they do have available and make them a more competitive program than they were for the bulk of the last 20 years.
Yep.
That's not to completely dump on Fran. He had a handful of years where they were, like upper third, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
of the Big Ten, but not many of them. I
Yeah.
think McCollum is a guy who can more consistently than that, at least, get them into that realm. And then, Indiana, of course, we talked about Darren DeVries. Good coach. I mean, what was your impression of him at Drake?
He's a good coach. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because, what's really funny is wasn't Nico Medved was the coach before
I'm
DeVries.
going to get to him.
So it's three straight
Three
former
Drake
coaches
guys
who've gone
coming
into the
into the Big Ten.
in the
Absolutely.
same year. It's
But
wild.
sticking with DeVries,
Yeah.
my sense is probably a guy who leans more toward the offensive end, which makes some
100%.
sense
Yes.
because
Mhm.
he comes from the Dana Altman and McDermott tree at Creighton. He was an assistant at Creighton under both those guys for forever before he took the job at Drake. So that's a change because Indiana has played absolute garbage offense since they fired Tom Crean.
Yep.
Tom Crane's problem is he couldn't get guys to guard well enough.
Right.
But his teams were good offensively. And they've been the Arch Miller and Mike Woodson eras. It's been a tough watch. So that's going to change, I suspect. He's interesting to me because on the one hand, we all know the resources IU's going to have.
Right.
He'll be able to get guys, even if he's not a dynamic recruiter.
Mm-hmm.
The question's going to be, because it's differently than any way he's ever coached before. He'll have access to guys he's never had. But can he, look at what happened to Mike Woodson this year, can he put together the right kind of roster? That creates its own challenges, right? It's not just as simple as here's a checkbook. We just go get guys and we go win. It doesn't work that way. You got to put a roster together that fits, that likes each other, that's functional. That's going to be a different challenge than he's ever had to deal with. The other thing is, I wonder about this. The last two hires Indiana had, and my understanding is he is like this as well, have not exactly been personable, press the flesh, get out there and do a bunch of media, get out there and circulate with fans, buddies with boosters. Arch Miller was not that. Mike Woodson was definitely not that. Indiana's a different kind of job.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard people say that DeVries is not that kind of guy either. He just wants to be a basketball coach. I think that's hard to do in Indiana. Now, if you go out and win, doesn't matter.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
They'll love you, whatever,
Yeah.
But if there's a period of some struggle, it can turn in a hurry if you're not that kind of personality. We haven't had to deal with this in Michigan State for 30 years. because we have a coach who is the most media friendly coach in the game. I think he's number one. And that extends not only to the amount of time he will make for media, national and local. It also extends to things like nobody ever, rarely do people talk about this. Michigan State keeps its locker room open
Yeah.
always.
Graham Couch talks about all the time how it's
He does.
unique. Yeah.
Yeah. Programs do not do that. Michigan State fans have been spoiled, absolutely spoiled rotten compared to anywhere else. But at a place like Indiana, they care and they want to reach out and touch everybody connected with the program. So that's something to watch with DeVries is does he win enough that the personality thing doesn't matter? And then the third name you mentioned, Nico Medved, he's the one who just had his season ended by Derek Queen. All indications are he is taking the Minnesota job. I don't believe that's been confirmed yet, but that is the expectation. He only did 1 year at Drake, right?
I don't recall, to be honest.
I
I'm not
think he
sure.
did 1 year and then he left to go to Colorado State and DeVries came in. I believe that's what happened. So it's the last three Drake coaches probably are all going to be in the Big Ten next year, which has got to be something for your dad to deal with. But I guess you expect it, right?
Yeah. I
You
mean,
figure if you
yeah.
got a good coach there, you're going to lose him. Um, but Nico Medved, another guy, pretty good offensive coach. He's a Minnesota native. He's another guy, though, that I think makes sense at Minnesota because he too has won his Colorado State teams. You know, Colorado State isn't going out and getting top 100 kids regularly, but I think he's taken them to the tournament 3 of the last 4 years. And they won a game this year and probably should have gotten Maryland today. So if you're a Minnesota fan, I think you got to be pretty happy if you end up with Nico Medved. I mean, we talked about how Ben Johnson got done a little dirty in this thing, in our opinion. But if you're going to move on from him, Nico Medved is about a best case scenario in terms of what was realistic. And if I have been told by someone who talks to people who would know, I'll put it that way, the word is that Minnesota, maybe as opposed to Iowa, actually does have some significant booster upgrades in terms of resources lined up.
Yeah. Well,
And they don't have, when it comes to the revenue share portion of all this, they don't have an equivalent really to Iowa wrestling. I mean, hockey matters, but it matters the way it does at Michigan State. It's
yeah.
not going to interfere with men's basketball if there's a desire to do something, you know? So I think Minnesota has actually got reason to be excited. And all of this, in my opinion, means you're going to be dealing with a little bit of a tougher neighborhood
Hmm.
in the
Yeah.
Big Ten. I think that's a realistic. I think that somebody's got to lose games. So we don't know where this is all going to go. But I look at it and I do think when you factor in the quality of the coach and in Minnesota's case at least, apparently the fact that the financial end of it is likely to change a little bit in a positive direction. You got to feel that all three are probably going to be better off tomorrow than they were today.
Yeah. Well, we'll leave it there because we got to get out of here. It's late. And yeah, just examples. I think it was a $5 million NIL deal to an Iowa wrestler. If people want to get an idea what it's like at Iowa. So anyway,
Wow.
it's,
What a waste.
you know,
Sorry if there's any wrestling aficionados
yeah,
listening, but Jesus
you don't want
Christ.
to, you don't want to take on wrestlers. All right. So
No.
until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green. All right. And we'll get this closed up quickly.